Low Carbon Development Strategy 2030, a strategy which was tabled before this Honorable House recently, but a strategy which has been in widespread public circulation for several months now, and which has been the subject of extensive national consultation, a matter to which I will return shortly. It will be noted, sir, that the executive summary of our 2020 Low Carbon Development Strategy recounts some very striking facts which are worthy of repetition, highlight, and emphasis. And I will select just a few of these for the simple reason that I consider them to be such striking statements about the situation in which Guyana is situated as it relates to responsible management of our natural resources and as it relates to our potential for low carbon development. These include, firstly, that Guyana has maintained the second highest percentage of forest cover on Earth, with more than 99% of the forest's 18 million hectares remaining. Secondly, sir, that Guyana's forests store 19.5 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, which, as those in the industry would know, is the measure used for the greenhouse gas emissions which cause climate change. And to put things in perspective, consider that we store 19.5 billion tons, and the world emits about 50 billion tons a year. So our relative contribution to the global effort should be evident for all to see. Thirdly, sir, that our deforestation rates are amongst the lowest in the world, and we are one of only 4 countries in the world and one of only 2 in the Amazon basin verified to have sustained a high forest, low deforestation status. And fourthly, that we are one of 6 countries which host the Guyana Shield, one of the most pristine rainforest landscapes in the world. And it is worthy in particular to note that the said Guyana Shield stores about 18% of the world's tropical forest carbon and 20% of the world's fresh water. And I will stop there, but I will commend the Low Carbon Development Strategy for close reading by all who have not yet read it, because it articulates in a rigorous yet accessible manner the remarkably unique position that our country occupies on the spectrum of sustainable management of natural resources, and, like I said, our remarkable potential for low carbon development. But beyond recounting these facts, sir, I wish to point out that this circumstance did not happen by accident. It did not happen by chance. It did not happen by good fortune only. Indeed, for generations, successive cohorts of Guyanese nationals have, in one way or another, recognized the importance of maintaining our forest cover. Indeed, long before greenhouse gases and the ozone layer and the emissions and climate change had entered into the popular, discourse, had entered into the nomenclature of sustainable management of natural resources, and had entered into even public consciousness. Long before, generations of Guyanese before us recognized that cutting down the trees would have had multiple perverse consequences. And for generations, our country has foregone what undoubtedly would have been opportunities for accelerated economic development, foregone the benefits of economic development which other countries who did not practice the same responsible management of their forest resources realized. The harnessing of their forest assets in pursuit of their model of economic development, the clearing of land for use, including things like urbanization, etc. Indeed, many of the world's best known and most prosperous metropolises were once forested areas, and where forests, where trees once stood, a concrete jungle now rises. And despite the fact that we have been foregoing and have foregone the opportunities that may, a century or 2 centuries ago, have presented themselves through less responsible management of forest resources, we have remained as a country whose responsible forest management has gone largely unrecognized. At the same time, we face more than most. We face an extraordinary threat and vulnerability to threat from and vulnerability to climate change. We all know the vulnerable state of our low-lying coastal plain, which remains today vulnerable to a single episode of high tide. And all of us have lived through several episodes of high tides overtopping the sea walls, the sea defense, the sea wall that we've had, that we've constructed over the centuries, in fact, and that we have spent and been spending and continue to spend billions of dollars to extend, reinforce, and maintain. And so we face this disproportionate vulnerability to climate change, when at the same time we are making a disproportionate contribution to the global effort to fight climate change through the preservation of our standing forests. So, recognizing and juxtaposing those two facts, in 2009, under the distinguished leadership of His Excellency President Bharat Jagdeo, Guyana articulated our first low-carbon development strategy. And that strategy made all of these arguments in a rigorous and detailed manner, grounded firmly in the science, and set the stage for one of the first payment systems for forest climate services in the world. And because at that time no market mechanisms existed to remunerate forest climate services, we entered into a bilateral arrangement with the Kingdom of Norway. And under that arrangement, we received over 220 million US dollars, over 220 million US dollars in payments for the work that we did to maintain not only our world-class forests over the period from 2009 to 2015, but also for the work that we did to lay the building blocks and to assemble painstakingly the foundation that would be required for a market-based mechanism. Things like a pioneering, world-class monitoring, recording, and verification system, MRV system, which up to today remains an outstanding example of what such systems should do. And it would be fair to say that the 2009 LCDS was a truly pioneering strategy, far ahead of its time and visionary in every respect. Visionary in its articulation on our case for earning revenue in exchange for the climate services that we're providing globally, and visionary in articulating the utilization of these resources to put Guyana on a path of accelerated economic development, but along a low-carbon trajectory. Investment in clean and renewable energy. It would be recalled, sir, that one of the flagship projects, in fact I should say the flagship project under the low carbon development strategy at the time, was the Amila Falls hydropower project. And had that project not been derailed by the deliberate actions of the then APNU AFC opposition, Amila would have been in operation today and would have been supplying more than 150 megawatts of power, of clean power from a renewable source, from hydropower, to the national grid as we speak. The cost of electricity would have been reduced to the people of Guyana as a result of Amila being brought on stream. We had the committed participation of a large, credible, large international investor willing to develop this project as a private sector project. But alas, the APNU AFC chose to adopt yet again a path of frustrating national development instead of supporting and facilitating it. But there were a number of other projects under the LCDS for which resources were mobilized. More than 2,000 jobs were created through support for small and medium-sized enterprises in low-carbon sectors on the coast and in the hinterland. The land tenure of our Amerindian brothers and sisters was safeguarded and strengthened with the design and implementation of an Amerindian land titling project. And under that project, 13 Amerindian villages received absolute grants to bring the total number of villages titled with grants to 109. We rehabilitated the Kunya Canal to protect local communities from flooding. We strengthened a number of our institutions, including the Forestry Commission and others. And so the LCDS, the original LCDS, not only mobilized a substantial amount of resources, but also facilitated investment of those resources in a number of very important projects. It would be recalled, for example, that over and beyond the Amerindian land titling project, it would be recalled that projects were also designed to roll out hinterland ICT, to bring information and communications technology into our hinterland villages, amongst others. Tragically, sir, in 2015, when the People's Progressive Party Civic demitted office and the APNU AFC assumed office, at that time, in fact, if I might offer a prefatory remark before I speak about what happened tragically, it would be fair to say, sir, that by the time we left office in 2015, Guyana was well positioned as a global leader on the subject of low carbon development. A global leader. It would be recalled, sir, that President Jagdeo was recognized internationally, recognized by the United Nations as a champion of the earth, a distinguished recognition for persons making a global contribution to matters related to the environment. It would be recalled that he was recognized by Time magazine and others for the outstanding leadership that he was providing and that he had provided not only to Guyana and not only in Guyana's interests, but the outstanding leadership that he was providing globally on this subject. And we, as a country, must be proud of that. Because here we were, as a small country, not yet on the global radar because of oil and gas and so on, which we all know oil and gas has helped to put us on the global radar. A lot of people have awareness of Guyana who did not have awareness of Guyana at that time. Here we were, as a small country, punching solidly above our weight, providing intellectual leadership on one of the world's most pressing problems, the existential threat of climate change. And here we were, Guyana, providing global intellectual leadership on this matter. And then, sir, in 2015, the People's Progressive Party demitted office, and the APNU AFC assumed office. And all of this work, which had been invested, in which was invested tremendous effort, not just at the political level, but we had also built up a world-class technical expertise, some of the best technicians in the world. And all of this work was brought to a crashing halt. The low-carbon development strategy was effectively shelved. The global advocacy on the strategy was abandoned. Not a cent more was earned. The strategy was shelved. And not only was the strategy shelved, but all of the projects that were intended to benefit the people of Guyana were also shelved and mothballed. The Amerindian land titling project, sir, ground to a complete standstill. Virtually nothing was done for 5 years from 2015 to 2020. The Hinterland ICT project, sir, was brought to a crashing standstill too. I'm told that some components were purchased and locked up in a bond, and nothing was done with them. They never arrived in a village, and not a single individual ever benefited from them. And the list goes on. I'm told, in fact, that perhaps the only project that did move was the Small and Micro Enterprises project, where some grants were given, but in customary APNU AFC style, those grants were given only to selected political cronies. And that perhaps, sir, is a matter for discussion on another occasion. And instead of using the work that had already been done to advance the cause of national development, a green state development strategy, as I believe, is that what they called it? I think that's what they called it. A green state development strategy was developed. And this green state development strategy, I'm told that the cover was green, the pages were green, the font was probably another shade of green. In fact, some of my colleagues are telling me, and the evidence suggests that they're absolutely correct, that the main anchor, the central pillar of this green state development strategy was to paint the state green. Every state building and every state fence, apparently that was the interpretation that was applied to it. The GSDS did not propose any credible strategy for raising revenue on anything remotely close to the scale that the low carbon development strategy had already done. And so, not having laid the foundation for generation of a flow of resources, it could not articulate the utilization of the flow that did not exist. And what is more, sir, is that whereas the low carbon development strategy that we had developed was developed indigenously, domestically in Guyana, by Guyanese people, and had benefited from consultation with the Guyanese people, whereas the LCDS 2009 was an indigenous strategy, indigenous in the sense of a local, a Guyanese strategy. The GSDS was, here again, in typical APNU AFC style, was the product of a farmed out intellectual effort. They got some international people to write it. I'm not sure if they read it. I'm not sure if they provided any input or intellectual leadership in its crafting. Some external consultants wrote it, and that was it. And so, once again, when it comes to the issue of low carbon development, once again, the 2015 to 2020 years can be characterized as lost years. We gave a commitment in opposition that we will renew our work on the low carbon development strategy, preparing an updated LCDS to reflect new realities. And of course, much has changed now. Guyana is now an oil and gas producer. That is a reality that has to be taken into account when one is engaging in any discourse on low carbon issues, and indeed on economic development issues. And so this, and of course our economic context has changed quite significantly as well. But what has not changed since the first low carbon development strategy is the commitment of this People's Progressive Party civic government to accelerated economic development in Guyana along a low carbon path. That has not changed. And if anything, we are reinforced in our conviction to pursue this path. Indeed, now that we have become an oil and gas producer, we feel even more strongly about the importance of maintaining our environmental credentials. And so the Low Carbon Development Strategy 2030, sir, represents the outcome of that, the manifestation of that commitment. The Low Carbon Development Strategy 2030 is an updated and expanded LCDS, building on what was already achieved in 2009 or out of the 2009 strategy, updating it for current realities, incorporating a number of new dimensions, including dimensions such as the blue economy. We have a lot of oceanic and marine resources. At the time of the original LCDS, that strategy did not incorporate the blue economy, our marine and oceanic resources. This strategy now largely reflecting the evolution of global thinking. This strategy now incorporates our oceanic and marine resources with a substantive section on the blue economy. And like its predecessor, the 2030 LCDS articulates a clear mechanism for mobilization of resources, for earning of revenue by our country. And of course, the global context has also been changed, and so the LCDS has itself been updated and expanded to take account of those global realities. For example, and perhaps the most obvious change, is the fact that when we did the 2009 LCDS, we recognized at the time that a market-based mechanism was really not in existence. That has changed quite a lot, and the world has moved much closer to market-based mechanisms for remunerating forest carbon. And so this LCDS reflects that reality and builds a foundation for Guyana now to earn revenue for the global climate services that we're providing, not only potentially from bilateral engagements like the one we had with Norway, but also in an open market arrangement. Mr. Speaker, in addition to updating to reflect these new realities, there are a few points that have to be made. First of all, sir, this strategy, like its predecessor strategy, goes to the core of the debate on justice and fairness. The reality is that forests are an extremely valuable part and one of the most effective means or mechanisms in the global climate solution. And so, from a global justice and fairness perspective, forests should and must be remunerated for the global climate services they are providing. It would be recalled, sir, that Guyana was also at the forefront of articulating the argument why standing forests or avoided deforestation should be recognized and remunerated in the same manner that reforestation was being proposed at that time as a solution. We argued that it would be perverse to reward those who have cut down their trees and are now planting them back, but not to reward those who have exhibited consistent good behavior by keeping their trees standing. And Guyana led that global argument. And so there is a fundamental principle that lies at the heart of this LCDS. And indeed, similarly at the heart of the previous LCDS, that countries like ours, custodians of standing forests, must be remunerated for the global climate services we are providing. Secondly, sir, we, as part of the global community, global family of nations, are committed to doing our part in the global climate effort. And in particular, we are committed to advancing the transition in so many areas of economic life that are important to this global collective global effort. To give you one example, the energy transition. Just last week, His Excellency President Ali addressed the Latin American Caribbean Conference of the International Solar Alliance, and he gave a seminal speech on Guyana's transition, Guyana's energy transition, covering the entire spectrum of our energy transition efforts, including, of course, our investment in gas, the Gas to Shore project. And of course, we regard natural gas as, like so many others around the world, we regard natural gas as a transition fuel. Our investment in hydropower, our investment in other renewables, including solar, mini grids, both hydro and solar. We are committed to making that effort. We recognize that our current fossil fuel-based electricity generation is not climate friendly, and moreover, is expensive and inefficient. And we will be investing, as is well known, we will be investing in transitioning our energy matrix to more clean and renewable sources. Additionally, sir, we have set up a number of robust mechanisms to ensure that the funds that, first of all, to ensure, I referred to the MRV system earlier regarding monitoring our forest assets, but also to ensure that the funds that are generated by under the LCDS, by our standing forests, that those funds are not carved out or earmarked or set aside, but instead are fully integrated in the parliamentary budgetary process. Those funds will come into the consolidated fund. They will be appropriated back out to finance projects in keeping with our low carbon development strategy. They will be subject to extensive and detailed parliamentary scrutiny, both ex ante and ex post. Ex ante during the budgetary process, ex post through the External Audit and Public Accounts Committee processes of scrutiny. And of course, we have complements of our 2001 constitutional amendments. We have several special sectoral committees who will be exercising oversight, who have the right and the mandate to exercise oversight over these matters. We will ensure, therefore, that the revenues that we earn through the LCDS are processed through, like I said, the most rigorous of accountability systems and be fully incorporated into the budgetary process. We will also, of course, be investing those resources, like I said earlier, in advancing the cause of low carbon development, including not only the energy transition to which I referred earlier, but advancing hinterland development. Just about a month ago, we hosted the first National Tushaus Conference. In about 2 years, I think for about several years it hadn't been held. At least 2 years it had not been held. Most recently because of COVID-19. We engaged, of course, the NTC conducted their business, the regular business of the council. The NTC meeting also gave government an opportunity to engage closely with the leadership so that we have the most current understanding of their development situation and of the priority areas of interest and concern to them. In fact, just a few minutes ago, this House just appropriated an additional $3 billion, a sum that was committed to by His Excellency the President at the closing of the NTC conference that was held here, the annual NTC conference that was held here. Sir, this LCDS takes Guyana forward. It creates a new stream of revenue for investment in low carbon development. It ensures that we remain a net zero country, which we already are. It ensures that we earn the revenue to which we are justly entitled, given the global climate service that we're providing. And it ensures that those revenues are invested prudently in investments to take us down a low carbon development trajectory. The strategy has also benefited from, first of all, outstanding technical work. And as I move this motion, sir, I want to acknowledge the work done by our world-class technical team. World-class technical team, who can hold their own on this subject matter against any of their international peers. Secondly, sir, the strategy has benefited from extensive consultations. We have engaged in several months of consultations throughout the length and breadth of this country And many of us on this side of the House have ourselves been participants in and or we have led consultations in villages across the 10 regions of Guyana. I think perhaps all of us on this side of the House have had the privilege of leading or participating in consultations across the length and breadth of the country. And we have received extremely valuable feedback from the communities, directly from the people of Guyana, indicating which aspects they like, which aspects they felt they wanted to have elaborated a little bit more, which aspects they considered to be their top priority, which aspects they would like to see perhaps expressed differently. And our technical team has painstakingly compiled all of those comments. And in that compilation has indicated how every single comment that was received was addressed. So we have a complete compendium of all of the comments received from this unprecedented wave of national consultations. And we have articulated how we have addressed those comments. And the consultations were not confined only to our Guyanese brothers and sisters. We also engaged in consultations with our international friends, the diplomatic community, the development partner community, and we received, again, very valuable feedback from all of them. I want also, sir, as I move this motion, I want also, sir, to say that the LCDS has benefited tremendously from a rigorous governance structure with its preparation, consultation, and refinement being supervised by a broad-based, multi-stakeholder steering committee. And I want here, sir, to recognize the role that was played by that MSSC. I believe, sir, that some of them are in the House. In fact, I know that I saw quite a few members of the MSSC, and they include, I should say that the MSSC is chaired by no less a person than His Excellency the President himself, who has taken the time to attend every meeting. I don't recall the President missing any. Perhaps he missed one, but not more. In fact, I see one of our distinguished members of our local team, Ms. Pradeepa Bolanath, who was integral to this work, indicating that the President did not miss any of the meetings. The MSSC was led by His Excellency the President himself, included the Vice President and a number of members of the Cabinet, bringing together several government ministries, but more importantly, including stakeholders from across our society, including, sir, our Amerindian brothers and sisters, private sector, labor, youth, and many others, all around the table, engaging in a process of preparing and refining this document. And so the MSSC served almost as the apex of this structure that led to the finalization of the LCDS 2030. And finally, sir, the preparation of this LCDS 2030 benefited from outstanding and unstinting political and intellectual leadership by both the Vice President and His Excellency the President. And I want today, sir, to say that publicly and repeat it. I suspect it is widely known, but it should be placed on the public record. Like I said, in his previous role as President, now Vice President Jagdeo had provided a lot of the global intellectual leadership in preparing the original LCDS. And he was once again instrumental in the preparation of this LCDS. And President Ali has immersed himself in this work. He has embraced this work, and he has provided the strongest possible political and intellectual leadership to get us to this point. I consider it, sir, most regrettable that our friends on that side of the House did not see it fit to come out today to support what can only be a strategy that will redound to the national interest. That, sir, is most regrettable, but perhaps not uncharacteristic of the APNU-AFC. Be that as it may, it is, sir, my privilege to move, and I will do so at the appropriate time once the debate is concluded. It is my privilege, sir, to move the motion to resolve that this National Assembly welcomes the tabling of the LCDS 2030 and endorses the strategy, supports the approach to investing revenues from forest carbon markets through two pathways, national programs and community or village-led programs. And I know at least one of my colleagues will speak a little bit more about that. That this National Assembly supports the proposal to dedicate 15% of all revenues from forest carbon markets to Amerindian communities, which will be supplementary to the funds received by these communities from the national programs. And that this National Assembly, through its established mechanisms, including its committee system, will oversee the investment of the revenues earned under this LCDS received from forest climate markets and managed through, as I said earlier, through an accountable system, through the consolidated fund and via the budgetary process. Mr. Speaker, LCDS 2030, building on LCDS 2009, is a truly pioneering and historic piece of work. And it is my honor to have been associated with it, and I believe that it should I believe that it merits the support of every single Guyanese person and certainly every single Guyanese legislator. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much, Honorable Senior Minister in the Office of the President. And as you mentioned, the multi-stakeholder group, and only last month, I think, was elected the chairman of the National Twelfth Council. So Derek John, who is here with us this afternoon. Chairman, now I invite the Honorable Deputy Speaker to make his presentation.
Mr. Speaker, let me start by saying that I am humbled, I am privileged, and I am blessed to, for the first time in what I think is Parliament's history, to not only be the sole opposition member, I'm also today the acting chief whip and the leader of the opposition. It is a task that I did not think I would have met anywhere in my life, so I feel very pleased by that.
Honorable Deputy, you have joined an illustrious group that includes yours truly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to start off to cradle the LCDS within the context of the Constitution. And when I say to cradle, I don't want to replace nor supplant, but to ensure that we understand how it fits together. And more specifically, to Article 149G of the Constitution of Guyana. And I'll read it for our people who are joining us virtually and who are looking at us on TV. And Article 149G reads, Indigenous peoples shall have the right to the protection, preservation, and promulgation of their languages, cultural heritage, and way of life. Now, I do recall in whatever it is, it seems like a while back, 2015, 16, 17, there was an administration that resided in a white and green house that ended up being green. And they produced something called the Green State Development Strategy. And I do recall, Mr. Speaker, that in the entirety of the development of that document, and I was on the National Two Shows Council, I was the vice chair of the NTC at the time, and not an iota, not a single line of communication, not a single phone call, not a single text that was sent to the NTC could be traced back, recorded, or otherwise, that asked the NTC or the Indigenous peoples for their views on the Green State Development Strategy. And I want to ensure that that makes it onto these parliamentary records. In converse, I stand here with what is now published and we are debating today, the Low Carbon Development Strategy. When we frame it within the context of the Constitution, we have gone out many times and talked about Indigenous people's rights, our right to our way of life. But if we don't have the forest standing, and our forest is integral to our livelihood, then what kind of life would we have? I didn't see much of that in the Green State Development Strategy. When we talk about forest governance, for example, I remember that there was an entire chapter on the promotion of good governance, the promotion of governance and governance and governance. But yet, what we saw to follow had the Green State Development Strategy mature long enough or far enough, we may not have had any governance at all, based on the path that they went down in 2020. And I don't know if that is their idea of forest governance and good governance. And I say that because when we contributed to this low carbon development strategy, we were asked for extensive comments, and we provided those, and I'm happy to say that I've seen a lot of it, granted not all, because there are some conflicting components, but I'm happy to say that I see a lot of what we have contributed in this Green State Development Strategy. The low carbon development strategy. We talk about responsible mining in rivers and forests, developing a larger framework for legislation and how we deal with overlapping land titles and a series of things. And I think before I go any further, I want to pay Dr. Ashley Singh a compliment. I think he would have said something earlier, and I don't know if he meant that the entire opposition, but I was assuming he didn't mean that I was absent, because I'm present in mind and in body. But I also think that my colleagues in the opposition could not be here, and you should take this as a compliment, honorable colleague. They could not be here today because they had no foot to fall back on to say that they would have voted against a progressive strategy for Guyana. And I think you should take that as a compliment. Mr. Speaker, I think that when you look at the document, look at the entire low carbon development strategy, and I haven't really picked out every single thing that I wanted to. I mean, it is comprehensive, and I know Comrade Gale said that I could speak. That means I'd have to speak after the next speaker and the next speaker and the next speaker. I don't want to do that. But I think of some of the complementary services that we are looking at. And when I say we, I'm talking about Parliament. When the budget was passed, it complemented and highlighted some critical components in the low carbon development strategy. Take, for example, the Armenian land titling program. And I can say this with the utmost confidence because, once again, I sat on the ALT board when I was vice chair of the NTC. And there was literally, in our entire tenure, 0 titles given out. Now, how do you begin to protect the forests when all of these UN bodies and a variety of other NGOs have said forests that is cared for by indigenous peoples tend to have better governance? But yet, under the previous administration, we had seen 0 titles. So there seemed to have been some conflict in how they would have developed their Green State strategy. Through the budget that we passed earlier, there is money allocated for land titling program. I mean, I sat in a very seat up on this side here through the NTC conference when His Excellency was right in the middle here handing out grants and land titles. A massive, massive change from what operated previously. And I think that speaks volumes for the commitment that the government brings, that the low carbon development strategy brings, and that we as indigenous peoples have in the direction that this document takes us. We had talked about how do we allocate resources to indigenous peoples. And I recall under that strategy when we had to do not only, we were trying to figure out how do you integrate the REDD+ activities into whatever strategy they were. Basically, they couldn't marry all of these things. They had sought an extension of the project from Norway. And I do recall a very critical meeting at Office of the President. Myself and the chair of the NTC, Tushao Joel Fredericks, were invited. And we were talking about meaningful consultations. When we showed up, we were invited, furnished the email. When we showed up at the gates of Office of the President, we were locked out. Ministry of the Presidency, thank you. We were locked out of those consultations. That is the extent to which they had wanted to consult on anything to do with indigenous peoples. I was heartened to hear during the debates that our honorable colleague Pauline Sukai had stated that there is money allocated for the revision of the Amerindian Act. And I recall also that under the previous administration, they had also allocated monies for the Amerindian Act. However, that project was to be driven only by 2 or 3 select persons from the ministry. That is not meaningful consultation. That is not inclusive. I have every confidence that my colleagues on the other side, I almost said opposition, but my opposition now. My colleagues on the other side will agree with me that when you talk about better forest governance, better governance nationally, that the LCDS encapsulates all of those things and then some. That when you talk about the revision of the Amerindian Act, it is not driven by 2 or 3 persons, but it is driven comprehensively to ensure that we have the kind of forest governance, the kind of support in indigenous communities to ensure that it ties in with what is written in this development strategy. Mr. Speaker, much like everything else, I strongly believe that the best way forward at most times is direct. No walking around, beating around the bush. There are talks of non-consultative process, talks of non-engagement, talks of a whole host of things. But comparatively, I don't really think that there is a comparison. Maybe inclusively, I would say that there has been, from 2009 to now, no document that had greater consultations than what is before us right now. It was consulted to before 2015, from 2009 to 2015. And even after the PPP was out of office, it was still being consulted upon to draft some strategy that stood opposed to this. And then when the administration got into office, they rolled out another series of consultations. I don't even, in my humble view, believe constitutional reform was that went through that process. I want to take this opportunity to say to my friends and colleagues that the document that we have before us is comprehensive. It stands in line to support Article 149G of the Constitution. It does not supplant it. It does not replace it. When you couple those things with the revision of the Amerindian Act and with what we are going to be debating here today, the diversity in changing how we manage forests, i.e. the hemp bill, I think we could all agree that the LCDS is a document that takes care of our future and our children's future and our children's children's future. And I am happy to say, Mr. Speaker, that I wholeheartedly and unreservedly support this document. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Deputy. And now for the Honorable Minister of Amerindian Affairs, Ms. Pauline Sukhai.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wish to immediately say that the motion before us on the low carbon development strategy finds my immediate support for approval by the National Assembly. The low carbon development strategy has four major objectives, which is outlined in the Guyana Low Carbon Development Strategy 2030 document. The Minister of Finance has already alluded to its objectives, so I will just rehash that the Low Carbon Development Strategy 2030 sets the direction for Guyana's economic development today to 2030 and beyond. Mr. Speaker, allow me to Mr. Speaker, allow me to record that the LCDS was subjected to adequate consultations. Even in the face of COVID-19 pandemic, 8 months of deliberation on this strategy. Consultations were taken to every hinterland region, engaging Amerindian leaders and community development chairpersons from clusters within the many districts. To report that there is adequate representation of Amerindians on the MSSC, I am pleased to announce that the recently elected National Tushaus Chair has been included almost immediately upon his assumption to that stakeholder committee. On that committee, I'm also want to place on record that the APA, GOEP, TAMOG, NDF are also included. Included are also is the private sector, stakeholders from many other sectors. I also wish to say that consultations included Amerindian leaders and village councils at the National Tushaus Conference. The technical committee took time out to ensure that the strategy was once more provided, or insight to that strategy comprehensively was provided to the leaders. As the LCDS moved into the implementation stage, it is expected that all elements will be subjected to detailed consultation and aligned to the budgetary process. An annual consultation with NGOs and individuals are expected also to be conducted. And this is according to the document. Today, I wish to address the LCDS, which offers Amerindian and hinterland interventions to complement opportunities for improved livelihoods, further securing land rights, improved services, infrastructure, among many other development supporting intervention that will be funded for advancing development in the hinterland. The initial LCDS, under the successful bilateral agreement with Norway, offered a number of benefits. The 2013 signing of the Amerindian Development Fund and the land titling project are two such important projects. It was unfortunate that under the APNU AFC government, it was either their unwillingness and non-support for the continuing of the ADF and of course the halting of the ALT program. This was significant for Amerindians. The land titling project, which sought to secure land rights and expand the areas or location owned and utilized by Amerindians. I wish to assure Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Member, Mr. Schuman, that the Amerindian land titling is back on track. And currently the unit is actively pursuing the full details to ensure that the agreed on targets are achieved. There was monies available always to pursue land titling and demarcation as left by the PPP civic government. However, we cannot forget, or we must always remember, that it was the APNU AFC government that failed to pursue aggressively that project. Another reminder, Mr. Speaker, was that, or is Amerindians today own privately an estimated 14% of Guyana land mass. Of course, this is not static. Recently at the NTC conference in July, we were very happy to have provided two communities with additional extensions to their communities. And we have also been able to complete 5 demarcations, that is, cadastral surveying of the boundaries of villages, 5 villages. We must, however, never forget that it was the APNU AFC government which attempted to railroad the successes of the ALT by halting the activities under the project and directly attempting to mastermind the lumping of Amerindian land issues under a commission of inquiry which was set up with one of its activities under its terms of reference to inquire into Amerindian land ownership, which was addressed under the PPP civic government. That, Mr. Speaker, was a core activity of that commission of inquiry. And one can recall the objections by the PPP, by the People's Progressive Party at the time in opposition. That too was objected by the NTC of the time. And we can recall vividly that it was the APNU AFC which attempted to ghost the NTC by inviting the APA to deliberate on the matter when it was raised and the objections was raised. Mr. Speaker, I wish to say that His Excellency and the Vice President has led our government to be one of the government and country which internationally is leading the way with respect to building a low carbon economy. And this means quite a lot for not only Guyana, but we are an example to those who are venturing out in similar fashion. I also want to briefly say here that in comparison to the APNU AFC Green strategy, I recognize that that strategy, as many have explained, was a strategy which sought to green everything in Guyana. Even the areas where we sit is indicated by a green arrow. It must also be put on record that it was the PPP civic government which continues to uphold free, prior, informed consent, not only with the consultation with regards to the low carbon development strategy, but also I would like to once more allude to the mention by the honorable member on the other side, Mr. Schuman, who noted that our government has allocated in 2022 budget monies to initiate the revision of the Amerindian Act. And yes, $10 million have been allocated for that activity, in which we will move to set up the committee that will involve stakeholders such as the NTC working alongside government. I want to recall also that the NTC is the legitimate elected body to represent Amerindians in this country. I wish also that the National Assembly be informed that it was under the PPP civic government that consultation took the lead on both occasions, and that the LCDS 2030 is expanded to include investments to the real sectors, making them sustainable. This motion, Mr. Speaker, includes a whereas clause which states, and whereas the strategic prioritize the evolution of Guyana's sale of forest climate services. Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Minister of Finance has alluded to this too, whereby the motion also lays out that the LCDS 2030 sets out how Guyana can move to the second phase of the Plan for Forest Climate Services, where payments from the Kingdom of Norway can be replaced or augmented by the payments from forest carbon markets. This is a huge step. And again, I want to place on record that it is the PPP civic government and its leadership and our country, Guyana, that is fully prepared to venture into the carbon market. The LCDS 2030 offers a significant benefit sharing mechanism for Amerindian villages and communities. This benefit sharing mechanism was endorsed at the recently concluded NTC conferences by all the leaders, where it was recommended that 15% of the sale of carbon will be assigned for Amerindian and local communities. Mr. Speaker, here again is a very tangible evidence that our government not only makes commitments, but our commitments are as strong and has always been implementable. And therefore, I believe that the 15% of all proceeds earned or every US dollar earned from the sale of carbon is a significant movement forward, whereby it is expected that villages and communities will directly receive such payments that will be used to consolidate development and investment in terms of transitioning their economy and building a much more solid village economy. The community village-led program for indigenous people and local community is also set out in this motion, where it speaks about the village sustainable plan or its equivalent put together by communities themselves. Again, the motion is very clear that our government respects the ability of the villages to derive and to develop their own pathway. And there's not going to be a top-down approach, but a full consultative approach at the village level. And government will so be advised when that process is completed. Investment plans for LCDS 2030 will be the means through which climate financing from the LCDS will be measured, and the impact of actions financed and monitored. Mr. Speaker, this is taken from the document. It will outline the main program areas for each sectors within the LCDS, and it will offer a mechanism to direct activity implementation, track LCDS financing within the national budgetary process. Again, you can find this in the concluding parts or section of the document. And any strategy obviously should be able to have and declare their investment plan. Mr. Speaker, I wish at this point in time to provide the level of credit to our government and to its leaders for being able to pilot another LCDS, and in this stage, an expanded LCDS, to ensuring that we are comfortable in terms of understanding where we would take Guyana, and recognizing not only the key role that the Amerindian plays in the protection and sustainable activities which they employed as it relates to the forest, but that our nation as a whole have come to realize that our country is not only the saving grace, but we are part and parcel of the lungs of the world, and that we have recognized that for the services our forest provides, that we should be compensated rightfully so. So I take pleasure in once more providing to this House support in the passage of this motion, and to place on record that I am very pleased also that the National Two-Shows Council have fully endorsed the LCDS 2030. I thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Minister of Amerindian Affairs. And now we call on the Honorable Minister of Natural Resources and the Environment, the Honorable Vikram Bharat.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I must say that Guyana is indeed a blessed country. This is one of the few countries in the world where our parliament will be engaged in such a debate on such a motion. There are very few countries in the world that is not fortunate like Guyana to have a forest like we do, that we can actually craft a strategy that speaks significantly to our green economy and also the blue economy now in the expanded LCDS 2030. I say that Guyana is a blessed country, Mr. Speaker, because there are many countries around the world that is now grappling and now putting mechanism in place so that they can achieve net zero, so that they can be carbon neutral. Guyana, however, is carbon neutral, Mr. Speaker. As a matter of fact, we are in the negative. And as a government, we are not satisfied. We are taking steps to further reduce our emission. And I will speak to that as I continue, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is a blessed country when you have 86% of your landmass covered in forests, maybe only second to Suriname. We are blessed because we have, as Minister Singh mentioned, 99% of our virgin forests still standing, probably one of the only country in the world. Further to that, Mr. Speaker, we are probably one of the only country in the world that we have reserved almost 2 million hectares of land in areas that we identify as the conservation area, namely the Shell Beach area, Ayakorama, Kaichor National Park, the Kanuku Mountain Ranges, and the Conishin area in South Guyana. Those are our 5 preservation, 5 areas that we do not allow any form of economic activity with regards to logging and mining. Yet again, one of the few countries in the world. And this speaks to how serious we are, Mr. Speaker, about the preservation of our environment, about the preservation of our forests, about our contribution as a small developing country to being the lungs of the world. I say, Mr. Speaker, that we are blessed because we have in Guyana, and we can boast about it, and we should boast about it, one of the best forest management system in the world. One of the best forest management system in the world. Many speakers before me mentioned the monitoring, reporting, verification system. Very few countries in the world have this system implemented and active in their country. Very few countries that are engaged in logging activities actually do selective felling, like us in Guyana, but instead they do clear felling. Mr. Speaker, even though we have been focusing so much on our forests and preservation of environment, we are blessed too to have so many natural resources, an abundance of natural resources, including copper, and their high prospect, and I speak with no technical data, but their high prospect that we may very well have lithium deposits too in Guyana. And we know that copper and lithium are the elements that will be needed as we move forward into the new world where there will be renewable energy and not fossil energy. Mr. Speaker, I say blessed too because Guyana right now is the fastest growing economy in the world, something that we are very proud of. Mr. Speaker, we are net zero, but we are still transitioning. We are still reducing our emission. And finally, Mr. Speaker, I say that we are blessed because we have good leadership. We have strong, bold, decisive, visionary leadership in our government today, led by none other than our president himself, Dr. Irfan Ali, our vice president, Dr. Barry Jagdeo, who is very instrumental and who is the leader behind the crafting of the low carbon development strategy, which started in 2008 when our vice president was the then president, and yet continued to develop the low carbon development strategy 2030, which of course is an expanded version of the 2009 strategy. Mr. Speaker, and my colleagues outlined the benefits that Guyana enjoyed from the 2009 low carbon development strategy. We enjoy as a country the bilateral agreement with Norway, a sum of almost two or a little over 220 million US dollars, used wisely in land titling, in creating alternative economic activities, especially in hinterland riverine communities, where the main economic activity is logging and mining. Mr. Speaker, I wish to support wholeheartedly this motion today, this expanded low carbon development strategy 2030, which speaks directly to the green economy, biodiversity, and also our blue economy, which is added to the low carbon development strategy 2030. That is our abundant supply of fresh water in Guyana. Mr. Speaker, the low carbon development strategy is built primarily on four pillars. And I wish to just outline the four pillars on which the low carbon development strategy has been built on. Firstly, create new incentives for a low carbon economy. Sustainability planning, that is forestry, biodiversity, water resources, ocean, marine resources. So, Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned, Guyana is one of the few countries that have over 90% of its standing forest intact. A forest that can actually hold 19.5 billion, tons of carbon. Tons of carbon. So we are making our contribution as a small country, to the world. And the conversation right now around the world, Mr. Speaker, and is resonating from country to country, from continent to continent, is the conversation on climate change, cutting emission. There are many countries that are now making commitment to cut emission and to move to net zero or to have 100% renewable. Guyana has far advanced its agenda with regards to moving towards renewable. We are already net zero and we are planning to even cut that further. The second pillar, Mr. Speaker, is to protect against climate change and biodiversity loss. Climate adaptation and resilience. Climate resilient agriculture. And that is why you realize, Mr. Speaker, that we've been focusing so much on agriculture. And again, we are a blessed country because most countries that are venturing into agriculture will have to experience a significant amount of deforestation in order to have land for agriculture purpose. We in Guyana, we don't, Mr. Speaker, we don't have to cut down our forests to get into agriculture. We already have enough fertile land available that we can venture into agriculture without cutting down our forests. Climate change, climate risk assessment and insurance, coastal infrastructure. And Mr. Speaker, this is very important to us. This is key. As we know, Guyana is one of the countries that is actually below sea level, especially on the coast area, especially our capital city. And we have been experiencing the effects and impacts of global warming, of climate change, especially of recent. We have never seen the kind of flooding that we are experiencing right now in inland regions. And most of these regions right now, as we speak today, they're underwater. So we definitely need to look at our infrastructure as we move forward, especially coastal infrastructure. If percent of the population that lives on the 9% coastal strip. Mangroves restoration, and we know that this project or a project has been started under the PUP Civic Administration prior to 2015 that has cultivated or has planted mangrove throughout the entire, almost the entire coast of Guyana. Another area that LCDS speak to, Mr. Speaker, is drought and flood management. Drought and flood management. The third pillar, stimulate future growth, clean energy and low carbon development, green jobs and sustainable livelihoods, clean and renewable energy, ocean economy opportunities, digital infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, Guyana away from fossil of power generation issue for us reliability of power generation, and this has been a hindrance to us for decades for not venturing into value-added downstreaming, value-added products, downstream activities. And as a government, we are now seeking to address this issue. Minister Singh spoke of the Myla Falls Hydro Project. That we would have left behind in 2015. Today, we would be receiving electricity or power supply at a much. We are paying today, Mr. Speaker, close to 30 cents, US cents per kilowatt. Had the previous administration continue with our plans of constructing the 50% of that today. Unfortunately, they didn't see it that way. They saw it as a PPP project and not a project that will benefit Guyanese like many other projects. State development strategy being a strategy of painting buildings and planting a few trees in Georgetown. But there's much more to that. There was no plan designed to bring in an income using our forest. Be alternative livelihoods for our people, especially. Mr. Speaker, in other words, we would have wasted. We could have gotten revenue from our forest. Now moving to project. Reliable electricity to us, but energy or by another 2 years, Mr. Speaker. Zero. Further to that, Mr. Speaker, 15 to 22 committed over 150 megawatts farm the other areas that are not two or three, I think it's three, Mr. Speaker, three mini hydros almost 30,000 free order. So we are transitioning away from the and then, Mr. Speaker, economy and how we can maximize more available. I met Colombia to the fight to leave that is in the low carbon development strategy 2030, Mr. Speaker. There is mine exploration or achieving when it's possible you're going and touch and the car from now the tree was that one production of fossils around the world and go wrong or try because if here to the poor to demand because tell it too who yung point the by euros global fossil significant others will not